Thank you, Amy, for reminding me to record it. Yes. Was it later or was it earlier?
Yeah, well, thanks, Joanne. You know, it's great. I was a teacher for many years. I started my career as a journalist working in Indochina during the Vietnam War. And I was very captivated or very engaged in the anti-war movement based on my experiences.
Peter, I have to tell you the sound has gone.
How's the sound now?
The sound, perfect. The sound that we so carefully worked on went away. All right, now it's
How's
perfect
that sound
again.
now?
Excellent.
And so I started my career, I'll just repeat myself briefly, as a journalist working in Indochina during the war. And that evolved into a strong motivation for social change. And I became a teacher working in the western suburbs of Melbourne. And I found, which is very industrial, I call it the Clockwork Orange area of Melbourne. And I found that the kids, more than half of whom were the children of immigrants from Italy, particularly from Malta, from Greece, and from other Southern European countries. They were language deprived in two ways. First of all, they lacked their parents' tongue because they grew up in Australia, but also their English was very poor. How's my sound, Joanne?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. So the kids had this language deficiency, and they were afraid to express themselves either in spoken English or oral or written English. So we had a real handicap to overcome, a real hurdle, I should say, to overcome. And we found that engaging the kids with popular culture, particularly with filmmaking, using what was then low-cost video, which had just come in, or Super 8 film, it really excited them if they could make reruns of Kojak or some other great figures of popular culture at the time, action films. And so we developed this quite extensive program that integrated filmmaking with language arts. And that became the anchor in which I developed my career. So I went on to specialize in curriculum development, always focused on this area of the relationship between teaching language arts and popular culture and filmmaking. It was that kind of overlap there. And then I came to the States in the early 80s, believe it, and after, I worked for public television for a while here, and that was a real struggle. I found that it was very hard to get employment in the States. It was a recession. My vision of social change was not resonating in the early Reagan era. There was such a shift in sentiment. And, I was and remain, what people call an old lefty at heart. So I actually decided, on the advice of my friends and family, to go to business school such that I could actually get a job and make a steady living and not work on contract. So I worked at CBS for a couple of years and really got to understand the business of the business. And after several years at CBS, I set up my own practice because I saw the flowering of non-broadcast distribution channels for documentary, educational, and specialty film. With the launch of cable and satellite channels like Discovery and A&E, and there were others. And secondly, we had the VHS video distribution platform was expanding, and that was creating markets for special content that previously never got onto broadcast. So I saw this flowering of specialty.
And when was that roughly? When would you say roughly that?
That would have been about 84, 5, 6, like that.
Yes.
And then I set up my own shingle, and I've mixed the timeline a bit, but I was really lucky. I became one of the first consultants to Discovery Channel, and I worked on a whole series of business plans for Discovery Channel, Discovery International, Discovery Productions, Discovery Home Video. So these were really, MBA type business plans, but I always kept my eye on, something that I wanted to do was to keep an eye open for productions that I could become involved in. So my consulting practice continued, and it really flowered during that period when cable and satellite channels were were expanding around the world. So I worked with Nat Geo, with food, with House and Garden, with weather, and many other channels as they established themselves in the States and then around the world, and became more and more familiar with programming rights. And I became also consulting with producers and production companies who wanted to supply these new platforms, that wanted introductions, that wanted strategic plans. So, that's a kind of a long history about how I put together, my qualifications that overlap a deep interest in programming, particular documentary programs, particularly programs that can change the world a bit. And then secondly, the business of the business. So I've got those kind of two overlaps.
Right. And also it seems that what you also have is, like, when you were telling the story about when you started out, you were a journalist, and then you were teaching, and then you put together, but we could use popular culture and video with the kids, from that kind of storytelling perspective all the way up to working with the channels. So it seems like you have a really good understanding of the whole, I suppose, supply chain, it might be called in business.
I call it the documentary ecosystem.
Why do you call it the ecosystem? Why do you call it the ecosystem?
Well, because it is an economic system. It's both a cultural system and an ecosystem. But, you really got to start with, what you want to do. And, I do anyway. My career has always been to work with what I want. And I want to work in this scripted field. And secondly, to try and figure out what the audience wants, because you've got to start with the audience, And I've never been a filmmaker that says, I have a vision, I want to make this product, and you have to love it and take it and open your theater for me and put it on prime time on HBO. I've never had that sensibility that I have something that's so important to say that people have to take it. And I meet a lot of filmmakers like that are just resentful because people don't accept their vision. Always my first question is, what do you want? Meaning the audience or the distributor, whether it's someone like HBO or Discovery. You have to ask what your audience wants first, and then figure out what you can deliver them. So that's been my
Peter,
schedule, Joanne.
I feel as though you're speaking exactly the things that I find myself talking to filmmakers. My work is I work one-on-one with filmmakers. And so a lot of times when the filmmakers I work with, for the most part, are making their first feature, and so many times you're just hearing all this passion pouring out to them, all this energy pouring out to them about this story that they're so compelled to tell, and shifting the attention to what is the audience looking for, what is the distributor looking for, which is basically the same thing as what is the audience looking for. That's the first job, that needs to get done.
Yeah, a friend of mine, I just as an important segue that I'll share. By the way, it's great to meet you all. I can see lots of names on the screen. But a friend of mine who's a veteran documentary producer, Michael Hoff. Michael always says, when you're making a pitch, it's like you don't go into it's like the doctor saying to a patient, take this medicine, it'll be good for you. The doctor doesn't take that approach. The doctor always says, where are you hurting? What do you want? What do you need? What's going to make you feel better? So that's just always, it's like finding out what your audience want when you tell your story. In most cases, I mean, there are artists who are self-funded who can make their own productions, and good luck to them. But most of us aren't in that generous, economic system.
Well, and even those artists who are in that position tend to be further along in their careers, so that they didn't start out that way necessarily, but they work their way into that position.
Or born wealthy or lucky.
Oh, those people exist too.
So I was going to say one other really important segue is that about 10 years ago, I've always been a teacher at heart. And even though I've been, you know, had a rich career as a consultant, and about 10 years ago, I decided to launch a newsletter which would be free, and that's called documentarybusiness.com. And you can go to that website and subscribe for free. And I provide my kind of senior level consultant, veteran wisdom in conversations with people. I just write about what I want. But it's very informative, and it contains a ton of useful information for documentarians and filmmakers of all kinds. And that's a weekly newsletter. So I encourage you to subscribe to it. And
documentarybusiness.com. Is that correct? Documentarybusiness.com?
Yep.
Yep. I just wrote it in the chat. Yeah, definitely sign up for that. It's really good. So Peter, and just so everybody knows, we've been working on the audio and we're struggling with it a little bit. So we're just going with it, what we have. So Peter, I want to ask if you look back over your career, what are some of the highlights with let's start with productions that you've worked with.
So I have a highlight. So I've always been tempted to be a producer, and I'd love to be a successful producer. I don't consider myself to be a creative talent, but I love to put together a package. But I always thought that that was a really hard thing to do financially. It was a real drain of time, and I had children and a family, and you know, I needed to make a living in New York. And you know, in many ways, I'm an Aussie off the boat in New York who's had to make ends meet, right? So I've never had the luxury of saying I want to be a full-time producer, but I've always kept my eye open for projects. And about 7 years ago, a Pittsburgh-based company, foundation called Steeltown came to me and asked them to work with them on a strategic plan for a film that they had made about, and it's very relevant, about a vaccine, about Jonas Salk and the development of the polio vaccine. Yeah. As a little boy, I was terrified of polio, so the subject really resonated with me. And I also knew two other things, that I knew that Steeltown, which is where Pittsburgh, which is where Jonas Salk was initially based, that they had a relationship with Bill Gates, because of course Bill Gates has been a very big force in the public health movement. And then secondly, I knew that the Smithsonian Channel was very interested in Jonas Salk, and that the Smithsonian, their partner, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, had a big collection of Jonas Salk memorabilia. So I brought the two together with myself serving as an executive producer. And then we ended up remaking the film for the Smithsonian Channel. It had to be restyled because we persuaded Bill Gates to come into the film, and he became the host and the presenter of the movie. So we remade the film somewhat with Bill Gates, and then it was broadcast on Smithsonian, and then we sold it to the BBC, and it's gone around the world since then. And interestingly enough, Smithsonian just relicensed it just a week ago or 2 weeks ago in the light of the coronavirus epidemic, because it's a show about an epidemic, really, the polio epidemic. So that was the perfect program for me, where and I get pitched all the time to become involved in projects. Every week something comes across my desk and they say, will you be executive producer? Will you be involved? And I say yes once every 5 or 10 years. And this one, it was because I saw Bill Gates as a possible partner and Smithsonian as a partner. And I thought, by bringing everyone together, I'll bring in the money, and it all worked out. So, and also, once again, it ticked the box for me. It was a program about a period in American history when we had a really engaged president who was a really intelligent person, who was dedicated to public health, and who organized a really amazing program to develop a vaccine and to allow it to be, and to have it distributed to Americans, and also even a little boy in Australia like me. So that was that one.
That was an incredibly smart move to get a major funder to be in the film?
Yeah, I just, interestingly enough, my experience, I've never been a hard salesperson. I've always been I've always allowed the conversation to develop, allow people to have confidence in you. And then, so I'm not a really hard pitcher. And there are other filmmakers that are just brilliant marketing people that would be able to walk into an office and do a fantastic pitch. And I can, I cover that in my newsletter, how to put a pitch reel together, etc. But for me, it's always all about the conversation.
That's great. That's great. So completely on a different angle. So not in the production world, when it comes to the networks, what is it that you would like filmmakers to know about what those networks are looking for? That may be the question. What are those networks looking for?
The first answer to that question is that you do have to find out what they're looking for. There's nothing, right. I've sat in on many pitches where filmmakers have pitched the House and Garden Network on a crime show, or they've pitched Discovery ID on a cooking show. I mean, where are they? I mean, every time you pitch a potential distribution platform or funder, you have to do a ton of study about what they want, what their priorities are, what they've pitched recently, and what they're probably looking for in the future, how their audience is composed. It requires a lot of study, and don't mismatch your pitches with the kind of the network or the platform that you're meeting with. You really need to do that study. I put out a study guide called Sweet Spots: What US Networks Want and What They Pay. And that's, my kind of starting point for that report. It's a research-based analysis, and it says, this is how much networks pay, this is who the key contacts are, this is what they've commissioned recently. You need to know all that stuff. You can spend a lot of time finding it on the internet, except you'll never find out what they pay, what's their standard.
Right. Yes.
It's hard to find. But you need to do that research for every pitch. And the same if you're pitching a rich person or a foundation. You've really got to get into their heads, And I tell you, I have another bit of advice too, that if ever you get into a pitching situation, always have other stories in your back pocket. Because let's say I pitch, I don't know, my polio Jonas Salk film to Smithsonian Channel. And they say, well, we just bought a film about that. We don't need to do it.
Right.
We're sitting across the desk, so what are they going to say? Have you got anything else, Peter? And if I say, nah, I'm sorry, I've only got one pitch today, I've wasted a tremendous opportunity. Yeah. So I think all filmmakers need to have their A and their B and their C projects that they have, in more or less advanced development, so that if you're ever in a meeting with a supporter and they say, we really like you, Peter, Jim, Grace, whatever. We like you. We'd like to work with you, but we don't want to work on that project. What else do you have? Have another idea. Either a title and a tagline. So that gets to me, what do you need? I think if you're in a pitching situation, you need, titles are really important these days. I mean, looking at reality, would porn stars, PAWN stars, have been as successful if it was called Las Vegas Auctions? So having a great title is really, really critical. And then you have a tagline. And then you have an elevator pitch. You need to work at all these levels, an elevator pitch, and then a one-pager. And then finally, if you can invest in it, a sizzle, a trailer. Definitely no longer than 3 minutes, and preferably about 2 minutes.
Oh, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Thank you. 3 minutes or 2 minutes. I love it.
I'd say, virtually never less than 3. And if they like the pitch reel, they'll come back and they'll say, can you show me some more video? But you don't want to bore them to, to start.
Yeah, yeah. I just have been given the opportunity to be able to pitch to HBO. But I wonder, like if I know, like a lot of my clients have lots and lots of different documentaries. Some of them are here. Hi, everybody. So what's the process of actually getting to the point of being able to make that pitch? What's the work that needs to be done to get into the room to be able to make that pitch?
Well, in January, I would have told you what to do, right?
Uh-huh.
Pre-COVID. So, it's a huge question. I mean, okay, so pre-COVID, when the world gets back to normal, when we have a vaccine or we have, precautions or we've assumed mortality, whatever happens, when the world gets back to normal, the world will start having conferences and markets. And
Yes.
it is absolutely critical that you do everything you can to attend these conferences and markets and festivals, and to get into pitch rooms. First of all, to watch other people pitch, to watch their strengths and their weaknesses, and then to start pitching yourself. And my experience when after I left CBS is that I just jumped in and started going to MIP TV, which is this big market in Cannes in France. And I got to tell you, I was terrified. I saw all these people walking around in suits, and I thought, God, here I am all by myself. I'm self-funded. There's all these big shots wandering around with their chests puffed out and they're full of confidence. And I realized about 90% of them were just like me. They were all looking for the next hustle. They were trying to find the next introduction. And so I just, you've got to overcome your fears when the time's right. Go to a local film festival and then start going to national markets like Sundance, Tribeca, Mill Valley, whatever. Go get in on the pitch sessions and watch and learn, and then start submitting your own pitches. And then when you get a chance, I always believe that going overseas is more testing than staying kind of locally. So if you have the financial resources, if you can afford it, go to one of the big international markets. And I do a lot of work with Sunny Side of the Dock in France, which is really great. They love it when English speakers turn up. You get treated better than just being another American or Canadian turning up in Toronto for hot docs, or in the US for Sundance or Tribeca or South by Southwest. So I just can't emphasize that it's really important to socialize your project, and the best way to do that is at a conference where you're going to meet multiple people. The path of just doing it alone, writing to HBO, for instance.
Right.
My name is Jim and I have this great film. It'll go straight into the letterbox, or spam or whatever. And it's very, very hard to get through.
I have my just ones that I really like. And I love to go to Sundance, even though I don't like the snow. I go to the American Black Film Festival every year. There are just certain ones that I like to go to. But could you talk a little bit more about Sunnyside? That's not one that I'm familiar with, but I know you're very involved with them and have been for a long time. Can you talk a bit more about what they have there and what the opportunities are, and why because I feel as though I've done the same thing. I feel as though when I find a place that's really great for the kind of networking that we need to do, then I stick with it. So
yeah, it's good. It's a good point, Joanne, is go where you're comfortable, where you're most comfortable. I think it's very important to go somewhere where you're most likely to have really interesting conversations. And, if there's a hotel where all the buyers are in the suites upstairs and all the wannabes are left in the coffee lounge downstairs, it's not really going to be worth $2,000 to register and attend and stay in a shitty hotel or whatever you're doing if you're an independent, So I think you've got to do your study. Where are you going to be most likely to be able to meet people of different levels? So Sunnyside is a great example, and it's become my favorite. And believe me, I get invitations to attend all of them virtually. Sunnyside is in France. It's in La Rochelle, which is a provincial town. It's on the shore. It's in the third week of June around the summer solstice. So, you know, it's light until 10 o'clock, 10:30. And people sit around and eat really well and drink nice wine and chat until midnight. You know, it's just a really lovely, chatty, conversational market in a beautiful historic city, it's town. And there happens to be enough business people there for you to be able to advance your business. You can get meetings, you know, more regularly than you can at many other markets. So, you know, there's some of the qualities that that I like. And also they really like Americans, when Americans and English speakers, when they turn up, because they don't want it to be a French only market. Whereas if you go to Hot Docs or Tribeca, you're just another independent on, you know, looking for success.
Yeah. So I like that concept of if you're going to invest, you know, it's going to be $2,000 or so to get a place to stay, buy the pass, eat food, you know, to go somewhere that's really going to provide those opportunities. Does Sunnyside also provide pitching opportunities?
Pitching, yes.
Yeah.
And the pitching, actually, if you're interested, you can go to the Sunnyside website. It's called Sunnyside of the Dock, and use the keyword pitching. And they just announced, I think they have 6 categories, and and they had 400 applications, and they have like 5 films were accepted in 6 categories. So go have a look if you're a documentary producer. So they do have pitching opportunities. And all networks, most of these festivals, like, you know, Hot Docs and others, have pitching opportunities. The chances of getting into Sundance, for instance, are so small, like they're about 1 in 200 or something. So don't save your money. Don't even bother. I was going to say one other thing. If you're a young person, and I can see that many of you are, you can also volunteer to be an intern.
Ah, yes.
Many of these festivals, and for that they give you registration, and you still, even though you might, you know, you have to work for your income, you still get for your, you know, the registration. You still become a kind of an insider, and you meet a lot of people. If you ever get a chance, if you're young and at the start of your career, to become an intern at a festival or a conference, do it. And then finally, if there's a conference that's looking for someone to help produce a panel, someone that can be an associate producer or help the producer of the panel, that's another role. I have a young producer working with me, associate producer, who's helping me with Sunnyside right now, because I'm doing six or 8 panels and meetings there. And I think that's a really great experience. It exposes you to what's going on. Yeah, volunteering, interning, if you're young and getting into it, really important, you know.
You just reminded me.
I was just going to say, you might think your ideas are precious, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of precious ideas at a conference, but what they really want is someone that's going to help them make it happen, you know, put their shoulder to the wheel. And just by the way, I practice what I preach. For these conferences, I don't get paid for nearly all of, or for many of them, I don't get paid. Some I do, but I produce panels, I publicize them in my newsletter. My old theory is you gotta, you know, if you reach out, you get back. Reach out, get back. Give up, give away something. Don't wait for someone to give you $1 before you do something. Just do it and wait for the $1 to happen. That's a much better solution, particularly in the COVID era.
That is fantastic. I was going to say, you reminded me that many years ago when I was living in Miami, I volunteered for the film festival, and I didn't know, you know, what I was going to be asked to do. And they said, "Oh, will you be in the VIP room and take care of the guests?" So I got to hang out with all of the people who were coming and the stars of the movies, and I was shocked. You know, I was just like, "Oh, I'm going to volunteer," you know, and that's what happened. But
I'm totally with you, Joanne. yeah, you got to be humble. You got to do whatever it takes, you know, to get to meet people and feel, you know, feel comfortable. You know, I've got a
So,
funny, you know, I got one
no, go ahead.
story. I was brought up in Australia. I'm of Irish ancestry, so I'm a Catholic, right? Well, by culture. And I was at Cannes at the international market, and Cannes happened to fall on Palm Sunday. And Palm Sunday was my mother who'd passed away. It was one of her favorite holy days. So I thought, you know what? I've never done this before. I'm going to go to Mass today. I just have this feeling about my mum, and I should do the right thing. So I went to Mass and I go to communion, and who's standing in front of me but the vice president of CBS, who was a Polish guy, of Polish ancestry, and he recognized me because he'd seen me in the corridors at CBS, although I'd been down here and he was right up there. We chatted afterwards and we had a cup of coffee after, and we developed a relationship out of that. So it's
Fantastic.
just one of those examples. You've got to be out there, right? You know, if you're not there at events, and if you're doing it all at your desk, it's going to be really hard to break through. And I know that's really hard in this COVID era where we're isolated, but you've got to find ways to volunteer and get your name and your work in front of people.
Yeah, I love what you were saying about the volunteering and the pitching in and actually making things happen. And it sounds like a simple thing, but I know that you know about this, Peter. I know about this, but it's rare. It's rare to find people who will actually make things happen and move things forward, you know? So those people are valuable, very, very valuable. So in the States, if again, we're looking at investing serious money to go to events, where would you recommend? Which would be for documentary filmmakers, what would be the ones you would recommend in the States?
Depending on the resources that are available, the ones that are closest.
Yep.
And then, you know, I just do your research. I think it differs from person to person.
Okay.
You know, let's say,
yes.
You know, if you're a wildlife filmmaker and you want to make, and I love wildlife films, you go to Jackson Hole in the States. I'm involved with a conference in South Africa. And a young filmmaker approached me and said she wanted to get more involved in the business. So she volunteered to be an intern at this South African conference. And they gave her registration, food and meals, the whole works. All she had to do was get to Durban.
Right.
Which is probably at the time about $1,200, right? But for $1,200 to have 10 days at a really great conference to make friends with people, she is now so connected. And unfortunately, COVID has interrupted her career path because she was on the way to becoming a really useful person in the industry. I tell you another thing, if you're a filmmaker, if you want to be a filmmaker, it's not necessarily the clearest path to becoming a filmmaker in production. I know many, many people that got into film production and have been really successful through either finance or sales. You know, people become a sales assistant. All they do is just schedule meetings for a salesperson. They get to know the buyers. They listen in and they say, oh, you know what? Those French broadcasters, they really love archive-based films about the First World War. I'm going to pitch them one. And the next thing, bingo.
Yeah. I love that. And that's the whole reason I wanted to do this series and call it The Filmmaker's Life, is because there are so many different ways to be working in the film industry and so many different approaches to it. So yes, we make films, but also there are ways to find jobs and work and volunteer positions and so on that can really build that networking muscle.
Yeah, also you can get a job in the business that's not in film production. If you're in, you know, as I said, you know, bookkeeping or sales support or something, you're closer to becoming a filmmaker than if you're sitting in your basement, for most of you, unless you have a lot of money and you can go out and make films yourself.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's more than one way to get from New York to Los Angeles. You know, there are lots of ways. You can walk, you can fly, you can ride a bike, you can take 10 or 12 routes. So.
Yeah. So I want to ask this question that all filmmakers I hear, I shouldn't say all, but most filmmakers today have this thing of like, I want to be on Netflix. I want to have my film on Netflix. And knowing the difference between the different networks. So when I think of like Home and Garden, you mentioned Home and Garden, Discovery ID, Netflix feels to me a lot more sort of amorphous, and they have a lot of different things on there. Can you talk a little bit about what it is that Netflix is looking for and what they're interested in?
So Netflix is, the best way to look at Netflix is that it's the new combination of both basic and premium cable. It has everything except sports.
Mm.
So it has everything. So they have a documentary department, they have a reality TV department, they have travel and cooking, a lifestyle department, and they, of course, you know, their big success story, their premium productions are bingeable scripted drama series. So they have a tremendous array of programs, and I was just reading some notes from a study. I'm rereading some notes from that I wrote for a study that I've put out called Netflix 2020. It's called the title of the study. It's on my website, Netflix 2020. They are just carrying on business as usual, just waiting for the world to open up, trying to invest in procedures and protocols that allow production crews and talent and so on to both travel safely and work safely. And Joanne, I wrote an article about this yesterday for a newsletter called footage.net about how, and it covers initially just the step-by-step process whereby Netflix are putting together the production protocols that are allowing them to produce a drama series in Iceland, of all places.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
In the New York Times. So, you know, Netflix is just carrying on as business as usual. I have some bigger thoughts about Netflix, and that is with the scale of the disruption that their scripted series are experiencing. So their movies and drama series are being seriously disrupted. You know, less so their comedy specials, because they often just have one comedian and a small crew.
Yes.
And then looking at the documentary field, which is, remember, you know, a fraction the cost of a scripted drama. The most expensive documentary costs less than one of their movies with B and C level, you know, celebrity actors involved in them. So the documentary field, because it's less expensive, or the unscripted field, is going to see an upswing in commissions from Netflix to fill the gap from all those dramas that have been cancelled and suspended. But you've got to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? It's not like every documentary. Let's say it's a David Attenborough special that involves taking 20 wildlife photographers cinematographers to Antarctica. That's not going to happen. On the other hand, if it's more of a what I call backyard nature film, a guy in Yellowstone who's made a special about bears, grizzly bears or brown bears, black bears, that's more likely to be produced. So you've got to imagine which films can they commission are going to be greenlit in the unscripted space because of their, I would call it their facility for production.
Yep. Well, you already gave a really big clue, because when you were talking about all these different departments, you know, I think that what I hear when I hear a filmmaker say, well, how do I get my film on Netflix? That they're thinking of some big, you know, conglomerate, which it is. But when you just went through all the different departments, lifestyle department, you know, so So the question might be then to identify who the people are in the right department who might be interested in hearing about a project.
Okay, so I think that's a good question. I think if you're an indie, like a newbie, the chances of you getting to meet with and pitch a decision maker at Netflix are very, very small. You can write to them, you can call them, you can find out where they, where they drink when the bar's open. You can do whatever you want, but it's going to be really difficult. But if you have a really compelling concept, there is an approach that I call marrying up. And that is that you identify that you find a production company or a producer who has a relationship with Netflix, who is, by reputation and by experience in and out of their offices. You meet with them and you say, I've got a great idea and I've already shot some footage. I want you to look at it, look at my sizzle tape. Can I work with you and move this towards Netflix? Now, the problem for you with that situation is that you lose a lot of ownership in the film, because if they love your concept and they do want to work with you, they're the ones that have the relationship with the money. They have the access, and that's where the value lies. So they're going to give you a credit as a producer or as a writer or something, but you're not going to get the big money. Not that there's a lot of money anyway in unscripted. So just remember, when you marry up with a documentary or a reality series, it's a great way to get in front of the decision makers, but you lose a lot of equity because you're not the one that's contractually on the hook.
But wouldn't that be a smart strategy for somebody working on their first documentary feature?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you're convinced that it's compelling, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I hear a lot of filmmakers get worried about losing their rights or losing their equity and so on. And I feel as though, well, but for the first one, that idea, I love the phrase marrying up. I'm using that from now on. That to me, it's all about opening the doors. Once that door is open, it's open. Once you have develop those relationships, they can become your relationships. But at the beginning, they're your partner's relationship, right?
Well, it's a partnership, but it would be a subordinate one for you.
Yeah.
If you're a beginner, don't get hung up on owning, exclusivity to some idea. If you've found a talent, if you know when Elvis Presley is going to come back from the dead, I would sign up the gravedigger and make sure that you have unique access, and you can take that to Netflix, or you can take that to a production company. If you've got a unique talent or a unique situation, if you know when Mount St. Helens is going to blow up again and you're the only person that's going to have a camera in place, sign up the geologist that's making the, prediction, whatever. You have to have exclusive access. You can't go to them with a project that 10 other documentaries filmmakers know about. So I just think that's really, really important for leverage. But if it's an idea just about a really interesting character, just an amazing person that's really compelling, and I'm thinking about a documentary right now, just if that's the case, sign them up, have exclusivity. And then, but however, when you take it to the filmmaker, remember they are the ones that have the leverage. They'll have the relationship with Netflix. You'll have your foot in the door, your toe in the door, you'll have your credit. But it's not like they're going to walk in arm with you unless you have something really unique.
Yep.
And,
so I would like to open it up for questions, if that's okay with you. And
yes, fine. How am I doing?
You're doing great. The sound is up and down.
Really
but
sorry about that.
No, it's, we're all, what I keep being aware of is we're all at home by ourselves. It's not like we can say, hey, this tech guy, can you come and help? So, and what I like to ask for people to do is to raise their hands physically to ask a question, so that I know that you want to ask a question. It's easier for me than, looking in the chat. And I'd also like to make sure that we're focusing on the filmmaker's role, so that we're not talking about abstract concepts that really have nothing to do with us. We're here because we're filmmakers. So who has a question? Paprika.
Hey.
Hi, Peter.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks for coming out today to visit us all and give us this great information. I'm a producer with a documentary about a vanishing culture of women jugglers in Tonga.
Where?
In the Asian Pacific Island group of Tonga.
I gotcha.
And it's a finished documentary that's now looking for distribution. But I'm just curious, with the COVID shift going on, I saw, I think it was an article you might have written about the Discovery Channel having to lay off a lot of people, and I'm sure it's happening possibly in other realms. What is your take on what's happening with that and how the flow of pitches and intake of new projects or even finished projects is looking now?
Now, good question, and a complex one too. You know, there are two types of two types of streams in a way. One is developing a project, which is going to be an original concept, and when you pitch that, and that gets taken in internally, and the project is developed so that it has the hands, the fingerprints, the passion of the network team involved in it. And then the second channel is an acquisition. So it's an acquisition of a completed film like yours. Nearly all networks are taking a second look at acquisitions right now because their production pipeline has been shrunken, been damaged by COVID. So if, for you to pitch a completed project to a network, now is a pretty good time. So, I don't know anything about your specific project, but I would then focus on networks that in the past have had an appetite for programs like yours. And I think thirdly, I always recommend that it's better to work through a distributor. And the reason for that is that the distributor knows how to pitch. They have an intimate relationship of what the networks want. They know how to do a contract. They have an established relationship. And networks, they want to work with people they already know and trust rather than invest in working with someone that they've never, met before. So, I hope that helps in general about the two streams. I would say in COVID right now, developing new concepts, with their production partners, receiving pitches, it's continuing, but green lights are very scarce right now, outside Netflix and the dominant and growing, streamers. I think Disney Plus is still, green lighting, Amazon less, Hulu less. And then there are niche channels like niche platforms like Curiosity Stream and so on. But you need to just do a lot of research. I would also say, Paprika, since you're a documentary filmmaker, subscribe to Real Screen and C21, which is the UK newsletter. And they have announcements every day about what's being greenlit. And that gives you a sense of what's happening.
What was the second one you said?
B21.
B21?
B21, that's a UK.
Great.
So, and there are other newsletters too, but I think subscribe to as many newsletters as you can and just glance at them every day because it's a bit like.
Well, I just subscribed to yours, so. I said I just subscribed to your newsletter, so I look forward to getting that.
2023.
Next, we're going to Juliet Romeo with a question. Go ahead, Juliet.
Hi, Peter. How are you doing?
Hey, Juliet. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for doing this. A lot of your information has been really enlightening, especially in this time. My film is called Sickle to Circle. It is my personal journey to find and receive a cure for sickle cell. It was in the process of just starting to film, and a lot of my footage was coming from times when I'm in the hospital or interviewing my doctors and other patients and researchers. And once COVID-19 hit and we were quarantined, my doctors were basically like avoid the hospital as necessary. So now it's more telehealth appointments. And I wanted to know, I also feel like it also changed the narrative of the story I was trying to tell about what sickle cell is and how it's affecting people that have it. So what would you say would be a good way to go forward?
Is this your first film?
It would be my first feature documentary, but not my first film. Not my first documentary either.
Okay. What would I do? Well, it's a medical film. And is it for a general audience, or do you think it's also for an educational?
It would be educational as well. My first short documentary was also on sickle cell, and a lot of educational departments were interested in it.
Right. Well, you know, I think as a movie, it really depends on just the quality of the story, and you know, we can't tell that from Zoom. So, is it a movie that is, you know, so transfigurative through its characters and it's an emotional material and it's through its powerful storyline that it becomes appealing to one of the strands on PBS, like independent lens or POV, or is it qualify for HBO? If it can be divided into shorter bits, it could be pitched to Curiosity Stream, which are interested in, you know, shorter.
The short that I did was picked up for PBS, and it's aired on PBS.
That's great. So I see it as more, you know, it's a challenging topic, and medical topics are actually hard to place. You know, people. Listen, the fact of the matter is that when people come home at night, which is when most of them watch TV, they want to have a beer or a glass of wine, or I don't know, legalize cannabis, whatever they do, and they want to sit back and relax a little bit. And so, you know, only a relatively small audience wants to be challenged and watch challenging films. So you have to find, you know, where's a home for, you know, a film like yours that, you know, is going to be somewhat confronting, even though I'm sure it's a very positive story at the end. And so that's what your research has to be. And there are a very limited number of channels in the States, but there are more in Europe and Canada and elsewhere that have a strong public television kind of a mandate. They have better funding than PBS in the States. So it's possible to find, you know, international support. And then the next thing is, you know, is anyone going to commit to you developing the film and paying for it to be developed? Or do you have to get it funded and sell it as an acquisition? You know, and we've talked about some of the questions involved in that already.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh,
thank you so much.
I was going to go to Hassan with his question.
Oh, no. I was just going to say that I am also raising funds for it as well. Good. So, but with everything changing, I kind of put things on a halt because I didn't know which direction to go, because I'm also not just the director, but I also have sickle cell, and I couldn't be around people because I'm, you know, autoimmune, you know, you know, I can't be around people. I needed to just kind of stop everything for my own safety as well. So it was kind of a difficult decision to make. And I'm just still trying to figure out what to do. Yeah.
Thanks,
not
Juliet.
alone.
So, yeah. Hassan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juliet.
We're not hearing you, Hassan.
Still can't hear.
No, your sound is not working.
I know how he feels.
So sorry, Hassan. You can maybe write a question in the chat. You know what? I'm going to call on Jonathan Viscuña to ask a question while Hassan makes his sound work. Jonathan.
Hi,
Hey,
Peter.
Jonathan.
My name is John. I'm a producer and a DOP and a writer for a very small family production company here in the Caribbean. And I'm working on a documentary on Garfield Blackman.
Interesting.
He's the inventor of soca music. And soca music is the musical driving force behind the Carnival celebrations that is played and enjoyed by millions of people worldwide.
Yep.
But he gave up his invention to go and live a humble life, an extremely humble life, deep in the jungle here in Trinidad, with his wife and God and 24 kids. And he also invented a new genre in the jungle with his family called Jamu. And we are very much interested in spreading this awareness to the world. And I was just thinking about, where do you see that this particular documentary will align itself with a particular network that you are familiar with?
Well, it's a really interesting story. So the first question I'd ask you is since it's a historical movement, do you have video of the young Garfield, and do you have access to plenty of archive?
To be honest with you, Peter, that has been the most challenging thing about it, is that what we do, we don't have him in his earlier stage because he was known as Lord Shorty, right? He was this big fraternizer and well-known calypsonian, and his stage name was Lord Shorty until he transformed after that encounter that he had into Ras Shorty Eye. So we have a lot of Ras Shorty Eye archival footage, but unfortunately we don't have him as Lord Shorty because back in his 60s and 70s, going on to 80s, there isn't a lot of archival footage. But what we are prepared to do, we have some but not much, but what we are prepared to do is to do reenactments of the earlier times. Yep. But when he was in the forest with his kids and the United Nations took up one of his songs for a drug abuse campaign in 2002 to run for 2 years, we have all of that great footage. Right. So I do have a sizzle, I do have a sizzle as well.
I think it's a really interesting story. I would say that in cases where a story comes from a particular national culture, to do everything you can to get local support to tell the story, because it's a much more important story to Trinidad than it is to HBO's audience in New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So do everything you can to get local cultural support. And as an independent filmmaker, but I think you really have to nail the archive, nail solutions. And, but it sounds like it's a really, I've seen other programs about, I saw a really beautiful program about the steel band about 3 years ago. Boy, that must have been about $1.5 million budget.
Oh, we know that film. We know those filmmakers. Yes.
Yes, that is Pan Odyssey.
Yes, Pan Odyssey.
Yeah, that was a really beautiful, amazing film. So it's a compelling category.
Yes.
I'm going to run out of time in about 5 minutes, Joanne.
We've run out of time. I'm going to see if Hassan got his sound working. Hassan, did you get your sound working? No, we're not hearing you. Okay, Renee, let's take you for the last question.
Thank you, Renee.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
My name is Renee Moncada. I'm a producer and director from San Francisco, and I'm working on a documentary about Big Frida, a bounce artist from New Orleans, which is one of the most contemporary music coming out of New Orleans to date. And the film is about his dilemma regarding his sexuality because he's gay and his faith. Um, and I'm in production now. I have a close relationship with the artist. And Netflix had a series called Hip Hop Evolution, which in the series features a segment on bounce music. So I know they're probably already familiar with the genre. My question is two parts. What category would that fall into? Would it fall into a more musical category or just straight documentary? And then what kind of deals does Netflix give in terms of numbers for a second time documentary filmmaker? And I should add, this is my second feature on a famous artist.
You know, Netflix recently paid $10 million to acquire a film.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tiger King is a $14 million series, $2 million per
Mm-hmm.
7 or 8 episodes.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I know that they've paid $25,000 for a completed film.
Right.
So, you know, the short answer to your question is, you know, they'll pay what they can. It depends on the content, the quality
Right.
of their film. If you're a finalist at Sundance, you know, that might help, but if you get a standing ovation at Sundance, that'll help even more. If you're a regular filmmaker with a really beautiful film that, I don't know, you know, wins an award at the South Georgia Peach Festival, Film Festival,
Mm-hmm.
you might get 10 or 25,000. Sorry, I can't be more helpful without knowing more information about the film, but it sounds really interesting and important.
I'm so glad that you landed on that last comment, the 10 or 25,000, because those are the kind of numbers that I think that filmmakers don't realize are the actual numbers that are in play. So I'm really glad that you ended on that. And I know we have to let you go, but thank you so much, Peter. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm so glad to introduce all these filmmakers to your work. Somebody was just asking specific things about your films, but you can go on the website, documentarybusiness.com.
Please.
There are so many resources that you can also purchase. There's a free weekly newsletter. You will get yourself an education from Peter.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanne. It's great to meet you all, and I wish I could talk all day because I do love to share my knowledge. Maybe we'll do it again one day, Joanne, but thank you very much.
We will. We'll do part 2.
And I'll have the sound really nailed.
Yeah. Well, you know, what could we do?
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.